Welcome to McMenamins UFO Fest. We're starting early because we have James Clarkson here. James, welcome to the program. It's so good to have you back here and in the flesh.
Oh, thank you sincerely. This is a wonderful opportunity.
And you're serving as our Master of Ceremonies here at McMenamins.
That's correct.
So you get the privilege of introducing and interacting with all these guests.
Oh, I know, and it is fabulous. And we already got to meet last night. We had dinner here in the hotel together, and this is going to be an amazing series of presentations. We're going to get all sides of the UFO mystery out of these 5 speakers, and that is a wonderful thing because it's still a big mystery, and sometimes it's even more of a mystery what the government knows, what they don't tell us, what we know that they know that we know, and on and on.
You mean there's more than one side to the UFO phenomenon?
Yes, I hate to break it to you.
It's not left and right?
No.
It's not gray and green?
Well, it might be some of that.
Okay. So talk about that, because right now in Congress, in the government, we have basically parties on both sides who want this disclosure. It's not a Republican and Democrat thing. It's an American, we demand disclosure.
I think it's bigger than America. I think that I realized this, in fact, when I was out there at the Ghost Conference, I realized that there are 2 questions that unite all human beings. We all want answers. We want to know what happens when we die, and we want to know, are we alone in the universe? Those are 2 fundamental questions that any human being who has an ounce of curiosity is going to consider at one time or another. And of course, now that things are beginning to come together, witness the Skinwalker Ranch and a few other places like that, we're finding that UFOs may link up with the whole other side, all things metaphysical, spiritual, strange, etc.
So do you think we're closer in getting to the bottom of are we alone?
Yes, with some qualifications.
Okay.
There has never been more pushback. We went through some amazing developments with David Grush testifying in front of Congress. I think we all remember that hearing. I think it was July last year. And think about this for a moment. David Grush was one of the people who would prepare intelligence briefings on a daily basis for the President of the United States.
Yeah.
This is a very serious, important job. And yet, he gets up in front of everybody and says that the U.S. government possesses recovered, crashed, and intact UFOs and possibly their occupants. He referred to them as biologics. And his series of statements and complaints was referred to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. I had never even heard of that, but I looked it up. They've got their own website, a U.S. government website, and obviously that's a very serious job. And they analyzed what David Grush presented, and I believe the 2 words they used, they said that his account was credible and urgent, which means they think it's important. We think it's important. But then on the other side, we've got the sad report that came out of Arrow in February of this year, written by Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And of course, if you want to, you could boo and hiss when I say his name, because he's kind of the villain.
He has become that because many felt that he wasn't getting the job done and that he was doing a good job of stonewalling witnesses, making them not want to testify or prohibiting them the opportunity to testify.
Well, he just moved on to a cushy job at Oak Ridge.
You mean he didn't retire, as the government told us?
Oh, no. He retired from Arrow into a
So he was, translation, he was shown the door.
No. I think this was all planned, and we got what was originally intended, which is we got a report that says, nothing to see here, folks. You can all just leave. Don't bother with your UFO festivals or your UFO books. It's all just nonsense because it's not scientific enough.
Yeah. But the whistleblowers aren't really telling us anything us anything new than we don't already know. This is stuff that we've talked about. I mean, this goes back to 1948 with the Aztec, New Mexico crash. These things have been crashing. They've been landing. There's been debris. There's been occupants spilled over land for decades.
Exactly.
And they're just now saying what David Grush said in 2023 has some validity. So why is he getting all the credit for starting this conversation that researchers and experiencers have been progressing for decades?
Well, you got to play this back to 2017, the Leslie Kean article in the New York Times, when they talked about the Tic Tac. And basically, although it was great that we had actual military personnel, fighter pilots, talking about seeing extraordinary vehicles, at the same time, they were trying to destroy our entire history by writing it out of the log. They're saying that there were no significant UFOs before 2004, before the Tic Tac. And we all know that that is not true.
Right. So how far back does it go?
How far do you want to go and how much time have you got?
Just give us a date.
We could talk about burning shields in the sky witnessed by Roman soldiers. We could go back, and if you want to go the ancient aliens route, we could be here all day describing possible encounters.
Now, didn't June Crane, the woman that you interviewed, talk about crash debris?
Yes.
And what did she say? That it came to Wright-Patterson?
Yes. She said that by the time she left their employ in 1952, she had heard about not one, but 3 crashed UFOs. Roswell is obviously one, but we also believe that Aztec is number 2, not sure about number 3.
Okay. Well, if there's the belief that maybe there were 2 crashes at Roswell, that could maybe be the third. What do you think about that?
I don't think that one works. The best idea that I have come across about Roswell is that it's one event with 2 parts. There were 2 crash sites. One of them was a first contact with the Earth, which left the debris field that was on Mac Brazel's ranch. And then there was the final come to Earth stopping point for the main fuselage of the wrecked vehicle. And that's where the bodies were. So what they did was they admitted to the public that there was a debris field at Mac Brazel's ranch. They didn't tell the public anything that wasn't already cat out of the bag and well known in the area. They kept the other one absolutely secret because they did not want the public to start writing and talking about or trying to visit the field where they found most of the wreckage and where they found the bodies.
So did June Crane ask you to keep her identity secret for an amount of time?
No, because she approached me after a lecture in the Ocean Shores, Washington Library in 1993, but she did not want to disclose. And it took her 4 years to make the decision to go public. And so at that point, she said, I've outlived 2 husbands, my cancer's in remission. What are they going to do, shoot me or put me in prison? And that's when I decided it was a good time to go visit her at her house.
But you have dealt with people who have asked you to keep their names and identities private because of their positions, say, in government or elsewhere.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite ones was a bona fide federal agent. And one of the times that my wife Joanne and I got to meet him was right here at the McMinnville UFO Festival. He was sitting in the audience in the big room up the hill. And then later on, we had coffee with him. And he works for one of the 3-letter agencies. And he had an extraordinary encounter seeing a UFO over Vancouver, Washington in broad daylight, and it changed his life. But he swore me to never identify him by name or his agency, and I will not break that promise now.
Any idea what's coming next on the disclosure front?
No, because we're going back and forth. We're seeing the outer part of an inner war. There's a conflict going on. People in organizations, we have a tendency to think of the government as monolithic. It's not. And people get old, they retire, they're replaced by new people. The new people have a different view of things. There's a cycle of generations, and these groups do not agree with each other, and they've been fighting for a long time, except that I think that the white hats are starting to gain some ground. We're starting to get somewhere towards disclosure.
Right. All right. Speaking of cycle of generations, it is with distinct sadness that I report to you the keynote speaker at the very first McMenamins UFO Fest, and one of the top investigators of this sighting that brings us together today in 1950, Dr. Bruce Maccabee, left us this week. That is incredibly sad. We owe that man a lot.
Yes, we do, very much so. Every bit as much as another one of the favorites of the McMinnville UFO Festival was Stanton Friedman. And I hope those of you who have been here before had an opportunity to meet him, because he was a giant in this field.
Absolutely was. We've lost too many of these researchers over the years.
But we're getting new ones.
We are.
They're not going to make us go away. And I always remember Stanton saying, don't be an apologist, ufologist.
Right.
And that's kind of my motto.
I mean, the problem with that is we're almost starting over. It seems like it's a cycle. You mentioned a cycle. We get new blood in.
We're ramping it up, though. That's the thing that's different. We're not letting them take away our history, and it's because of events like the McMinnville UFO Festival that we maintain our history, and we keep getting new people. So every time you look out in the audience and you see people, younger people, we know we're getting somewhere, because they will carry the stories forward. And the one thing they can't take away is our camaraderie, and they can't take away our history as long as we preserve it. We have to keep telling it, reading it, researching it, and passing it on to other people.
And the day seems like it's almost here where they can no longer deny this reality either.
Exactly.
James Clarkson, it's a pleasure to always have you. Let's hear it for James here at McMenamins UFO Fest.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
A confirmed attack is taking place against the United States. Aliens from an unknown location have been reported in multiple states.
We are controlling transmission.
There is another world that awaits, far beyond what we can see and feel. A place that's anything but ordinary.
What you believe might not be. Step into the zone of the vast unknown. UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, conspiracies and cover-ups. Into the paranormal we go with Jeremy Scott.
May 11th, 1950, a date that put McMinnville, Oregon on the map when Paul and Evelyn Trent photographed a UFO on their farm just outside of town.
Evelyn Trent was outside tending to the rabbits when she caught a glimpse of this strange object.
I looked up and saw this thing in the sky.
She yelled for her husband Paul to bring the camera.
They've got pictures. Those pictures went national.
The story of their sighting has gone around the world and back to the place that came to be known as Saucerville.
Welcome, everybody, to Saucerville here at the McMenamins UFO Fest. I am Jeremy Scott, and sitting right next to me are Scott and Suzanne Ramsey. Who says you can't make love over UFOs? That's true. You guys met actually on the radio doing an interview about the case we're going to be talking about today. Aztec, New Mexico, 1948. So, Suzanne, you had the radio show. You invited Scott on. Is that how it went?
I did. I was actually a guest on the show, and over the next several months, he brought me additional speakers and got a chance to know many of the really illustrious UFO researchers, and it was a gas. And then we just kept running into each other. And you know, it's funny, we must have passed paths, even though we lived in different parts of the country, for years. but then at that magic moment when we came together, and it was excitement, just we have a passion for this.
So had you heard of the incident before?
As a child, I lived I was from Chicago, and we moved to South Dakota, and my mother was passionate about learning and studying and researching, and over dinner one night she had been reading Frank Scully's book, and so I was familiar with Aztec. And then when they went to move from South Dakota, they wanted to find someplace warmer, and they decided to go to Aztec, New Mexico, and that's how it all came about.
All right, so Scott, when did you first hear about this crash?
1988.
1988, so about 40 years after.
Right.
And what was your first recollection?
I was out seeing a customer in Farmington, New Mexico, and they hire predominantly Native Americans right off the reservation, and we were testing a big generator, and they were talking about what they were going to do the next day being Saturday. And the one said, I think I'm going to go look for a place to hunt mule deer. And the other one said, well, whereabouts? Because maybe I'll meet you. He said, no, I don't, probably out by the old crash site. He said, okay, I'll see you out there about 10. And later on I said, what crash site? And they said, oh.
As if everybody knew what they were talking about.
Everybody but me.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, it's an old rumor back in the late 40s or 50s, a flying saucer crashed out on Hart Canyon Road. So anyway, long story short, we went back to the Holiday Inn, ordered a couple of pitchers of beer, and back then that's what we did. And they took a bar napkin and drew me a map on how to get there. So the next day I'm out there with my rental car trying to find a crash site. I didn't find it that trip, but I did the next.
Okay, and so where was this site located?
It's about 11.4 miles northeast of Aztec on Hart Canyon Road.
All right.
Out in the middle of nowhere.
And that's Aztec, New Mexico.
Yeah, Aztec, New Mexico.
I'm guessing there was nothing left there when you arrived 40 years later.
We found some interesting artifacts over the years, but no, the crash came down intact. So it wasn't like a Roswell where there was an impact and it broke up.
Didn't shatter.
Yeah.
Okay, so but supposedly you could still do some tests on the site after all these years, right?
And we did.
And what did you find?
Well, a concrete slab was uncovered by Randy Barnes in the late 90s. And it didn't mean a whole lot to us at first. We thought, well, this is weird, a concrete slab out in the middle of nowhere. And through erosion and silt, it had been covered up. Interviewed a gentleman from, long story short, interviewed a gentleman from the Air Force who had retired. He said, you'll know if you're at the right site because we cut the road in and we had to put concrete pads down to stabilize the crane. And Randy went out and found it, and then we uncovered it. And we took a core sample out of it and did tests on it, and it's from about that era.
Yeah. So when you open up a browser and you type in Aztec, New Mexico crash, the overwhelming consensus, it seems, is there's a lot of opinion online that this didn't actually happen. What do you have to say to that, Suzanne?
Can I address that?
Yeah.
If you've ever gone to see a movie and you miss the beginning, you've missed what the movie's about. If you watch a movie from the beginning and you miss the end, you know how there's a twist and a turn at the end, and it could be a whole different ballgame. It's kind of the experience that we've had with people studying the Aztec crash. We have covered all types of documentation about how it was covered up, but you lose track of the people, how do I want to say that? Lose track of the people that were involved in it.
Well, some of them are probably dead.
They are dead. They are dead. But the hoaxsters, really, what we found is people that say, and you'll see the word hoax, Aztec, and then you'll see the word hoax. There are 3 researchers that have gone and said this is a hoax. The problem is not one of those 3 has ever even been to the crash site. So what they've done is they've followed the research to a point and then they've stopped and they never finished researching it. We've had the pleasure and honor of doing that and showing step by step what happened and why it is considered a hoax.
I think the other interesting thing we did, we had a researcher go into Wikipedia and change it to facts as best as we know it. Not only our work, but other researchers. Within 24 hours, it was all changed.
So you changed the narrative.
Yeah. And
Well,
with facts.
With facts, that's the problem. Only partial story has ever gotten out before this.
I mean, it's easy to label something a hoax when you haven't actually investigated it yourself. It's easy to tell somebody you didn't experience what you did rather than open up your mind to those possibilities.
That's right. That's right. And we've really dedicated ourselves to documenting and only providing in our research the things that we can document.
Okay, so have you been able to make contact with some witnesses?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
What have they told you?
Well, one was a 19-year-old oil field worker back in 1948, and they got called out to the crash site, what we call the crash site, because of a bad brush fire. And if anybody's going to be at our presentation here in a few hours, the crash site was near some drip tanks from the oil field. And those tanks held anything from butane to all the derivatives from oil and gas, which are very, very flammable, as well as water tanks. But when they got the call that there was a fire out on Hart Canyon near the drip tanks, they got out there, and once they saw that the fire was down low and not up on the mesa, they went up and discovered the crash. That was about a little bit after 5 in the morning.
So, but witnesses, we have police officers, we have records from police officers. Los Alamos, there are records around in that area. We have I guess you would call him a county commissioner. We have a sheriff's department. We have
Baptist minister.
Baptist minister. That's a powerful story.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole list of people.
So what did the Baptist minister say?
He was on his way, knew nothing about it, saw some type of activity off the road and thought maybe there had been some type of an accident or something in the oil field or something, so he went out there. He was a circuit minister, and as he circled around and went onto the road, as he pulled up, he approached, at this point all the other witnesses are gone and the military's there, and he approaches the military and said, has something happened? Is there some way that I can help? And they said, well, can you follow us? So they went up over on top of the mesa, and they said there were 16 bodies were laying there. And they said, could you say last rites? And he said, well, I'm not a priest, but you know, I'm a Baptist minister, but I could say prayers. And so he went through and said prayers, and then ended up going home and was so shook up from this experience, he called some of his parishioners, friends that were parishioners, and said, can you come over? I just need to talk to somebody. And told them the story, and he was so shook up and crying, and they said, what is the problem? Why are you so upset? Did it shake your faith? Did it, you know, they didn't really know why he was crying. And he said, it was so sad to see the 16 bodies laying there dead. And he
Alien
said,
bodies.
Mm-hmm. And he said, I had no idea that this was even possible.
Were these typical grays or what?
They were about 4 feet tall. They were childlike, perfect teeth. They had blue uniforms on. None of them had any type of insignia, like, you know, ranking them or anything. They were burned, and that was, I think, troubling to him too, that they were burned, and it was just incredibly sad.
Anything to say about that, Scott?
The list of witnesses are just go on and on and on. The story is just so incredible. When it comes to the Baptist minister, we interviewed his son. We interviewed parishioners that were members of the church at the time. One is retired vice president of Frontier Airlines that said, no, this happened. This isn't an old man retelling a story. This really happened.
So was it a landing or was it a crash? Do we know?
It was both. It looked like a controlled crash.
So they tried to land, but they didn't make it.
Right.
Actually, there's a hole in the craft, just one hole, and we theorized that it was radar. That
it was the size of a quarter, like a 50 caliber. I refer to it as a 50 caliber bullet hole.
And a hole that size in an aircraft, could that alone down something?
Well, what we found that was really interesting, two things about the site and about the craft, is after it hits a mesa, and that's another witness that saw it, it hits a mesa and it sparks, it continues, and all of a sudden it goes straight due north. So we wonder if it didn't actually have like an autopilot or something that tried to land it.
Right.
Because all the bodies were dead.
Right. Or it could have fell victim to, say, our atmosphere, coming from their atmosphere. Maybe it's different, and maybe they're just not able to handle gravity as it is here on Earth.
Well, that could be. That's a possibility. However, in the area where this originated, where some of our witnesses started, Cuba, New Mexico, there had been military and there had been sheriffs and witnesses, the civilians, that had witnessed it, multiple of them, many of them, and none of them were wobbling and in trouble. So there seemed to be craft of the same type that were quite a number that were doing just fine. So maybe you're right, but you know, that's our theory.
Okay, we're going to take a short break, but we're going to return here to McMenamins UFO Fest. Our guests are Suzanne and Scott Ramsey. We'll be right back.
Into the paranormal.
I love one. Thank you so much.
We're talking about the Aztec, New Mexico crash in 1948. Let's hear it again for Suzanne and Scott Ramsey. Here in McMinnville, home of the 1950 Trent UFO sighting, which, by the way, will celebrate 75 years next year. It'll be the 25th annual McMenamins UFO Fest, and I'm going to guess they have some out of this world plans for us. All right, so talk about, I understand there were other sightings in the area that preceded this actual event.
That's correct. We go back even a week before the Aztec. Dr. Lincoln La Paz was called up. He was the Air Force, for the lack of a better word, astronomer. And he was called up to Los Alamos because they were having green orbs go over Los Alamos, which is, we know from the Manhattan Project, probably not a real good idea. That's very restricted airspace. The town of Cuba was having a bunch of UFO sightings. Cuba is about halfway between Albuquerque and Aztec. Lincoln La Paz showed up in Cuba. They had a town meeting, kind of like this, and he disappeared for a couple days, went out in the desert in a Jeep, came back with rocks and said, what you people are seeing are end result of meteorites. Mm-hmm. And the town got very upset, said, no, we're seeing objects go over, searchlights looking down in the canyons. And so they didn't take that too well. But there were sightings at Los Alamos, Cuba, and other towns around there prior to the 25th.
Any idea why this was occurring?
I always link it to Los Alamos. You know, this is only a couple of years after they detonated the Trinity site. That probably woke up a lot of people out there. Speculation on my part, but it seemed like they were following something to do with nuclear weapons.
All right, let's go to a question from the audience.
Yes, Scott, I'm a friend of Scott, and I've known him and Suzanne for a little bit. It's quite a nice little story, but I've read probably 24 different books about UFOs and all the studies that have been going on. The constant theme in all of those is nobody can seem to figure out what makes these things fly.
Yeah.
The propulsion systems, are the propellantless engines, what is the inner makings, and what do we not understand about the physics that make these things fly?
The question is, what makes these objects fly?
I think that's the whole key to why maybe the secrecy from the government standpoint. We were talking earlier today at breakfast about disclosure, and I don't think we're ever going to see disclosure.
See, and I feel like there's disclosure, but it's an ongoing experience. It's
always
being
happening.
Integrated,
Right.
yeah. It won't be, and I think what Scott means is it's not going to be a grand announcement that, ta-da, here's all our secrets. It's It's just not going to happen. If you look to children today, you'll see that bit by bit it's integrated in them, and they have no fear, no doubts that there are aliens. I mean, not when we were raised, that was not necessarily the case.
Is the fact that this case is not so well known as, say, some of the others because there was a cover-up?
Oh, there's a huge cover-up.
Huge cover-up, and I think it's one of the most comprehensive cases, period, because we have the pre-crash sighting, we have oodles of witnesses, we have physical evidence at the crash site, we have the scientists that actually worked on the craft, and then we follow up with the cover-up, and then things that happened afterwards. So I think, it's been a very long, expensive, and exhausting experience, but very positive in the way that it has kept us energized to keep searching, because it is that comprehensive. It's a full package.
The Aztec crash, keeping in mind, was intact. A lot of technology could have been extracted from that, for the lack of a better word. Our presentation today, in a couple hours, is going to show the interest from the Air Force, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Army CID, and the FBI.
All right, that's all the time we have, but we so appreciate Suzanne and Scott Ramsey joining us here live from McMenamins UFO Fest, talking about the Aztec, New Mexico crash of 1948. Make sure to check ufofest.com for their schedule and check out their presentation. We'll continue our broadcast right after this.
Aliens, gotta help us lead the way. Aliens, gotta help me save the day.
That's a guy named Adam Schoenfeld. He's a friend of mine. He's Tim McGraw's touring guitar player, and he's a studio guy that's played on 40 #1 songs. And he did the solo for my song.
Fantastic.
Hold on tight. You're about to land somewhere into the Parabnormal.
From McMenamins UFO Fest, let's hear it for Ron James. Good to have you here, Ron.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to McMinnville.
This place is a trip.
Literally from across the country? Where'd you come from?
Literally a trip, but it's also just such a delightful little town.
Where'd you come from?
I came from Sedona.
Sedona, Arizona. I hear that there's a lot of strange stuff that happens there. But anyway, why write a song about extraterrestrial life?
Well, I'm pretty well known in the field for doing a lot of stuff. So I've done a lot of movies. I've done a lot of shows. I work with the Mutual UFO Network. So really, there wasn't much left unless I want to become a painter.
There's a story behind the song.
I haven't told anybody this.
Until
you guys
now.
are the first to hear this. So years ago, when I was in Sedona the first time, this was back in the early 2000s, 2010 or so, I was in the swimming pool, my pool one night with my girlfriend, and I was floating her around the pool, and we were in an argument, and I looked up at the sky and I said, "Oh, aliens, come get her! Bad girlfriend, come take her!" and it turned into a joke, and then here we are, like 20 years later. I actually made a song out of the little phrase.
You're not still with her, are you?
We're still friends, and the aliens didn't take her, so she's still in Sedona.
I have a feeling
that's where that started. It was like, oh, aliens. It was.
I have a feeling those things don't happen on demand.
No, well, I mean, I guess some people will say they do, but I'm not one of them.
Yeah. So not an experiencer.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by these topics, but I think that we all have our roles to play, and we all come to do different things. And I think that I know a lot of experiencers, and I've done projects about the phenomenon of what it is, and it's a real thing. And I think that once that happens to you, your objectivity is out the window. You're not ever going to be able to come back from that and be open to the idea that there's a logical explanation because it happened to you. And so I think that I've been spared a lot of these experiences just so that I can look at these phenomena from an objective bird's eye viewpoint.
So your film, Accidental Truth, which of course we've done an episode with Ron, it was a couple years ago, I believe, when this came out, but you're getting ready to do another one. Was there something that happened to those people who were involved in the first film?
Well, people involved in the UFO filmmaking in general have all been James Fox, Stephen Greer, myself, Carolyn Corey, Darcy Weir. A lot of us were signed up with the same film distributor who started experiencing cash flow problems.
Oh, we've heard about that story.
Yeah, none of us got paid. So
is that what we're calling it? Cash flow problems?
Well, I have another name for it, but I don't want to get sued.
Yeah, please, thank you.
So it's very unfortunate, and some people think that, what better way to silence the community of people who have dedicated their resources to making films to enlighten the public about UFOs, largely without the ability for government and agencies to interfere. What better way to stifle these voices than to hit them in the wallet? And so, none of us can afford to make the next film if we didn't get paid for the last one. And so everybody that is making significant films, even Jeremy Corbell, was impacted by this. And it's a crazy, ridiculous thing. And if you're a conspiracy theorist person, you can say, well, this is a whole op. It's just designed to shut people down and make them go make movies about something else.
You focus a lot on crashes, UFO crashes in the film?
Accidental Truth was largely a film about crash retrieval programs and materials recoveries. And we made, Debrief Magazine called it the best case ever for crash debris and reverse engineering programs. And the film won 28 film festival awards, not just selections, but actually won the awards. I was really gratified by that, but shortly after the film came out, we had David Grush come forward, and a lot of people have told me privately, because I spend time in Washington, D.C., that film actually kind of created a bit of a stir, and the next evolution of disclosure came from partially from that coming out.
You do spend time in D.C. I saw a picture, you and Representative Burchett, who's been a integral figure in the whole congressional hearings that have happened, and even the behind closed door hearings. Is he losing his patience with this all? Because it sounds like it.
We're all losing our patience, and I interviewed Tim Burchett for Accidental Truth 1, and I just got back from Washington, D.C. and New York, where I interviewed him again, and we caught up, and him and Representative Luna and Matt Gaetz all went down to Eglin Air Force Base to try to get to the bottom of some stuff. And what happened there was a fiasco. And he told me about it. It's going to be in the film. There's some things we had to cut out that he said, oh, wait a minute, I can't say that. But let me just say that the stonewalling continues. The lies are as blatant as ever. We have these new results from Arrow that Sean Kirkpatrick put out, where once again, the Pentagon's official standpoint is that there's nothing to see, when this time the lies are so blatantly obvious that it's laughable. It's almost like that Roswell report where they said Roswell case closed and said that crash test dummies must have fallen through time and landed in the desert. It's like that. It's so ridiculous that it's almost an admission in itself.
So when David Grush then comes out last year and starts talking about crash retrievals, when we hear a report that the CIA, through one of their offices, has actually been involved in the retrieval of some of these programs, that actually adds more credibility to what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we made a really solid case. Nobody has ever, since Accidental Truth came out in April of last year, I'm not aware of a single person or entity that has tried to refute the facts that I delivered in the film. We lay out the programs, we lay out some of the stuff that resulted from those programs, we name names, and we've got a lot of big people, Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, Robert Bigelow. The reason it's called Accidental Truth, you guys will see in my presentation today if you haven't seen the movie. I kind of tripped up a lot of these guys and made them say things that they didn't really mean to say, and then they're like, okay. So, yeah, we made a really good case for it. Here's a fact. The modern UFO era started, prior to around World War II. There was recovered craft. This stuff's been going on since all of recorded history. The Vatican has vast archives full of information about non-human intelligence interacting with humanity for a very long time. But in what we call the modern era of the UFO phenomenon, we recovered craft. The whole thing was secreted away by people back in the day who made the decision that humanity wasn't ready for it. And over time, these programs have escaped all accountability and become so deep and so dark that you can't get to them. And then we have a historical problem where a lot of the people that started these programs, they're not around anymore. And the records of these programs are not around anymore. And it's hard to believe that the government and these agencies would literally destroy evidence, but they do, and they will. And there's some things that never saw the light of day, and we like to think that there's some warehouse that's got all this stuff in it, and one day we could open the vaults and know the complete
Well, they've
truth.
destroyed it by now.
It's gone. And that's one of the saddest things about this whole issue is that there's a lot of the truth that we're never, ever going to get access to because a lot of it is literally destroyed.
What does it say when presidents and members of Congress even select committees? Or as David Grush said when he went on News Nation, how even as a member of the UAP task force, which should be privy to this information, when all of those are denied access, what does that tell you?
Well, what it tells us is that back when the decision was made to compartmentalize this issue, the groups that did this were given a wide swath of money and ability to go very, very underground and be accountable to absolutely nobody. And over time, these people have exploited that to the point where everything is buried and sequestered within programs in government and industry, and it is so deep and so secret that the people that are in control and managing this information, they don't have to answer to anyone. And so they will keep this a secret forever if they can. And the technology that they've derived, a lot of people believe, and I'm one of them, that it could change the way things work on planet Earth. If we figure out what these energy sources are, well, goodbye to everything that has made the economy and the power structure on this planet work. And once that's done, you know, if there's free energy, then nobody needs to pay for oil. Nobody needs to feed this giant
but then
machine.
you're taking money out of somebody's pocketbook.
You're taking money out of the pocketbook of the most powerful people on the planet that do not want to see this change. And so, you know, that's one of the biggest reasons we're not getting the full truth, is because there is technology there that would upset the power structure. At the end of the day, we are all enslaved on this planet by energy. It is electricity, gas, and fuel that makes the richest people the richest, makes them the ones in control, and makes us literally having to work every day to pay for the things that we get to live. And if there was a box you could put in your garage that would power everything, including your car, it's over for these guys. And there could be an equality of standard of living on the planet. There could be this thing that the people in power are afraid of the most, and that is not being in power anymore. And so this is what we're dealing with. And the other aspects of the technology, national security, all this kind of thing, those are all part of it. But the people managing this information don't care about national security because they gave up. They're not a part of that issue anymore. They haven't been since the whole thing first started. What they care about is keeping this technology to themselves so that they can be the ones that exploit it, and making sure that we don't get the benefit of it until somebody figures out how to put a meter on it and keep us enslaved.
Yeah, and that national security part is very, very important, and at least among the mainstream, they're not focusing on it. They're just focusing on, well, these have to be UFOs, they have to be aliens, this has to be the tinfoil crowd. But some of this is a national security issue. Let's hear it for Ron James from MUFON and Accidental Truths, UFO Revelations. Ladies and gentlemen, right here, UFO, Garrett Graff. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
You can hold or you can...
I'll hold.
All right. So, this book picked up about a month ago, and I'm ashamed to say that I'm only about halfway through it because it is just chock full of information. There is so much in here. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my background is as a national security writer and journalist. I was editor of Politico magazine in Washington, D.C. I've spent the last decade as a contributing editor at Wired, covering national security,
right,
cybersecurity, counterterrorism. And I got interested in this subject because I noticed the way that the conversation had begun to change in national security circles in Washington.
Mhm.
That I am not a lifelong ufologist like a lot of the people on stage with me this weekend. But since 2017, since 2018, for reasons that sort of everyone in this room knows and understands, the conversation at the national level on this subject has really begun to change.
Okay.
And I began to see serious people in Washington talking seriously about this subject. And there was, for me, one very specific moment that got me interested in writing a book about this. So I've written half dozen national security histories on the Cold War, doomsday plans, 9/11. My book in 2022 about Watergate was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for history. And this subject got me, piqued my interest in December 2020. And probably some people in this room know the moment that I'm about to talk about. John Brennan, this at that point just former CIA director, gave an interview to another DC journalist named Tyler Cowen, where he, in terribly tortured syntax, says UFOs puzzle us. There's something there that we don't know what they are. And then he has this line that's basically like, some might say that this phenomenon might constitute what some might recognize as a new form of life.
Head is spinning over here.
And it was a really fascinating moment for me because I've covered John Brennan, I've interviewed John Brennan. He had spent, in 2020, he had just spent effectively nearly a decade atop the U.S. intelligence community. He had been White House Homeland Security advisor. He had been CIA director. And I figure if you are the CIA director, there are not that many things that puzzle you.
But we'll continue that. We got to take a break. One second. We'll be back with Garrett Graff. All right, I'm here with the author of UFO, The Inside Story of the U.S. Government Search for Alien Life Here and Out There. He is Garrett Graff, and you were talking about the CIA involvement, and particularly John Brennan. Please continue.
Yeah. So I was saying, if you are the CIA director, there are not that many things that probably puzzle you. If you wake up and say, I want to know what Jeremy Scott had for breakfast at Hotel Oregon in McMinnville last Tuesday, we have a $60 billion a year intelligence apparatus that goes out to solve that question. You know, we have satellites, we have sensor networks.
They're worried about that. We've got bigger problems.
We've got signals intelligence intercepts. We've got intelligence officers, covert action teams, intelligence analysts. And so if John Brennan is leaving a decade atop the U.S. intelligence community and saying, there's something to UFOs and it puzzles me still, that felt to me a very significant moment in the way that the conversation around this subject was changing in Washington.
And we've continued to see public officials make similar statements. I mean, look at the congressman, Chuck Schumer. The list goes on and on.
This is, and I talk about this in the book, this is one of the last and only bipartisan issues in Washington right now. If you look at the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, Marco Rubio, again, two very serious people in a serious role. They have been bipartisan and united in their push since 2017 to bring greater transparency around this subject, to push Congress, to push the Pentagon to take this more seriously and to talk about it more openly. And as you said, there has just been this sea change in the way that this conversation happens.
And of course, my hero of the first UFO hearing is Representative Mike Gallagher, who put the two Defense Department officials on the grill regarding the Malmstrom incident, which was one of those. I'm not sure, I haven't gotten to that part in your book. Maybe you discussed Malmstrom in there, but that's one of the most famous cases. And here, those who are on the carpet to answer about this don't have a clue.
Yeah, and I think that what you saw in that congressional hearing was, again, just how different the conversation is taking place on this. I go back in this book and sort of trace the history of Congress's interest in this. Mm-hmm. And, in the last 3 years, we have had 2 congressional hearings on this subject in the open. And before that, there had not been one since the 1960s, which was at that time organized by House Minority Leader Gerald Ford. That's sort of how long you have to go back to get Congress's attention to the subject.
Yeah, because right when we were here last year, we were getting ready for the May hearing, and then fast forward, we have one earlier in the year, I believe around April, and then David Grush comes forward, and within a month, we have another hearing. So that now makes 3 on record in just over a year, plus the 2 closed-door meetings that we're aware of. There probably have been more. Is that unprecedented?
The sustained interest is absolutely unprecedented. I think that we have seen Congress pay more attention to this subject in the last 5 years than we have seen Congress pay attention in the last 80.
Yeah. Speaking of 80 years, that's how far you go back in your book. Basically, this is an 80-year cover-up.
Well, I think what is interesting to me, and again, my background is in covering the Cold War as a historian, that the way that this subject first presents itself to the American public is so tightly tied to the anxieties of the early Cold War that, we always talk about 1947 and the Kenneth Arnold sighting as the beginning of sort of the modern age, but it's impossible to untangle those sightings and that summer of the flying saucer in 1947 from everything else that is taking place in the U.S. national security apparatus at the time. That you have that summer, the National Security Act of 1947 being passed, which is the most significant reorganization of the U.S. government that sort of sets it up for the Cold War that we have ever seen. This is the moment that the government creates the CIA, the first peacetime intelligence agency in our history. It creates the National Security Council, creates the Joint Chiefs of Staff, creates the Defense Department as a new combined branch of the U.S. military, and creates the post of the Secretary of Defense. And as part of that reorganization, also creates the Air Force as a standalone independent service branch. And it is in that moment that you see the first crisis of the U.S. Air Force being this summer of the flying saucer that it cannot explain.
And of course, right after that was the Trent sighting, 1950, here just outside of McMinnville, Oregon. We'll have a few more minutes with Garrett Graff from McMenamins UFO Fest right after this.
Facebook, X, Instagram, Threads. Yeah, we're on them. Give us a like, follow, or subscribe. Into the Parabnormal.
According to the latest report that's out, a secret CIA office has spent 2 decades recovering UFOs from around the world, has at least none of them in its possession.
There are newly declassified documents showing the curiosity of top senators pushing for answers regarding UFO programs.
Some of the most recognizable names in politics have been working to gain access to an ultra-secret UFO recovery program.
The Pentagon says the government once had a plan to reverse engineer any recovered UFOs, known as Cone of Blue.
Lawmakers continue to push for transparency about UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
The truth is far more abnormal than we want to believe. this. You're headed somewhere between abnormal and paranormal. Into the Parabnormal.
I'm Jeremy Scott from McMenamins UFO Fest. Garrett Graff with us. So, Garrett, are we closer to getting to the bottom of this 80-year quest for the truth, as you discuss in your book, UFO?
I think so. To me, so my book tries to weave together both the U.S. government's hunt for UFOs here, as well as the evolving, scientific search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the SETI project and efforts over the last 80 years. And I think, to me, one of the things that really stood out in the book and my research is understanding this revolution of human understanding in the last quarter century, that the math is on the side of the aliens. That, when you go back to the 1990s, as late as the 1990s, we did not understand that there was a single planet outside of our own solar system. We now understand that almost every star, effectively every star, has planets. That a large number, not a large percentage, but in the size and scope and scale of the universe, a large overall number of those planets are going to fit into that Goldilocks zone, the planets that would support life as we understand it and know it. Not too hot, not too cold, capable of supporting an atmosphere, capable of supporting an oxygen. And that number, in sort of rough orders of magnitude, astronomers now believe is 1 sextillion habitable planets across the universe. So you can believe that life is rare. You can believe that intelligent life is even more rare. But it is very hard to look at numbers like that and think that we are a 1 in sextillion chance across the universe. And, again, that is new knowledge for humans and new understanding of the universe that is, changing, month by month right now as we have advances like the James Webb Space Telescope that teach us things about the universe that we did not understand. And so I think that, the way that we now need to think about the possibility of life across the universe is just fundamentally different than it was even 25 years ago.
So we have learned quite a bit then through this process. Even though the government's stonewalling us, we have learned.
Yeah, and I think that what we are seeing is that the conversation now is different. The conversation sort of is much more likely to begin with the assumption that life elsewhere is possible, and that this is now much more a technological conversation about, how you cover that distance, how how a species would live for the length of time it would take to cross interstellar space, sort of, et cetera, and that, this is basically now a technical problem, not a philosophical or spiritual one.
Yeah, well, we're hearing more about the spiritual aspect, particularly of late. The Vatican has just talked about this actually this morning, and I haven't had a chance to really get into that. But we're hearing other figures on other podcasts, national news, say that, these could be demons or they could be angels, that who knows what an alien actually is.
Yeah, and I think not unrelated to that, what was surprising and interesting to me, the previous guest talked about this a little bit as well this morning, that as someone who is used to covering national security, writing about things like cybersecurity and nuclear war, understanding the spiritual underpinning and foundation of a subject like this and how that interplays with the technological and security questions that are wrapped up in it. That's one of the things I'm going to be talking a lot about tomorrow in my keynote.
Yeah. Any idea what's to come on the disclosure front?
No, and I don't know that any of us really can understand where this subject is going to go in the next 10 years.
What does it need?
Well, to me, one of the things that is most inspiring about the work that these SETI scientists in particular are doing is this idea that they are embarking upon a quest that may not be settled in their own lifetimes. You know, this is a scientific process and scientific quest that may take us still, you know, centuries or thousands or tens of thousands of years to fully realize and understand. And I think, to me, one of the challenges is making sure that we appreciate sort of the beauty of that and the length of that this quest may take, and sort of not get caught up in, you know, the question of like, do we discover this next Tuesday or not until, you know, next May?
Right. It's here for Garrett Graff, ladies and gentlemen, from McMenamins UFO Fest. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're going to research what the Vatican actually said about this topic and do an upcoming show about this. They were supposed to discuss apparitions, but they also threw aliens in there. And so I'm not exactly sure what they had to say about that. I do know that coming up next for us is Roderick Martin. Let's give him a round of applause. Now, you are a member of MUFON, is that correct?
Yes.
The Mutual UFO Network?
That's the guys, or the people, the group.
Okay, and your role there?
I'm an investigator, just like everyone else, except for Ron and the rest of them who are on top of the food chain there.
Right. Yeah. So you get these reports, you go out and on boots on the ground sort of investigation.
And you have to. That's where it all is. That's where the real action is.
Yeah. And so, do you mind telling us of a few of the cases you've investigated?
Well, I mean, I would say through MUFON, because I get a lot of cases that come through my email and through my own audience.
Right.
But via MUFON, I would say most of our stuff is web-based because, you know, when COVID hit, we wasn't really going out visiting anyone's home. And so I came in when that new dynamic started. So phone calls and things like that. And so most of those cases was just pretty general. You know, someone said, hey, I saw a UFO. And I'm like, okay. And, you know, you call them, you want to ask them, you know, hey, were you drinking or anything? Because you want to verify what's going on. But other than that, yeah.
So how do you investigate something like that where, I mean, there's no evidence after the fact besides maybe a video? You know, if this thing didn't land, it didn't crash. I mean, how do you do that?
Well, via MUFON and the training that they give us, we do have a series of questions that we will go down or ask the witness. You know, you're definitely going to talk to them on the phone. You're going to verify the information because in the CMS we can see their reports. We can see the time and if they did provide any other elements, pictures, videos, we can collaborate that. But for the most part, you do your own research from the underground, looking at the weather report. Kind of want to make sure, especially if you get a story, say I saw it and also there was a 747 next to it, and you're like, really? There was 40,000 feet up there. So, you know, then there was clouds, then there was a tornado, then there was a hurricane, but they saw it. So, and I'm not saying that I go against the reports, but you have to definitely look at those things precisely.
So there's some things that you can say was not a UFO. It was some sort of weather phenomenon, or it was a drone, or it was something else. But there are a percentage of these which are unexplained.
Absolutely. Yeah, not everything was going to be what we consider a UFO, but although anything flying around that we don't know what it is a UFO. And not
by
all
definition.
Yeah, not all UFOs are aliens either, but all aliens drive UFOs. So.
Do they? Or do they designate certain pilots?
Well, I mean, the way
who
it's
knows,
going
right?
today, who knows, right?
Right. So tell us about your work, particularly in the African-American community.
Okay, well, good. First, I would want to talk to all of my friends, so everybody say, hi, Roderick. You know,
hi, Roderick.
Yeah, that makes it a lot easier to go into the conversation. One of the things in my community when I did start this journey, it was a real glare, or what I call spotlight on, there was a lot of lack of information, a lot of disproportionately reporting and representing within the community. So it made it difficult to navigate some of these stories that we've heard or not heard of. And so once I start going down that, then that rabbit hole thickened, and then I start making some glaring discoveries. But for the most part, It is a taboo subject in my community. This is why most people may not have heard a lot of these stories. And I will ask the audience, how many of you have heard of any stories that consisted of African American in the mainstream? You can raise your hand if you have. But then I'm going to say, let's eliminate Betty and Barney Hill and the Zimbabwe story. Outside of that, put your hand back up, right? And so, and that's my quest, because you're talking thousands and hundreds of thousands of stories, but over here, you don't hear them. And if we look at this as a collective, and we're all supposed to be in here together as truth seekers, then this pie's got a big slice missing. And not just me, but in the indigenous areas too. So what happens if we're missing data? What happens when you have books and stuff that's published that don't have the entire story, but yet we put them out there? So I think it's important to look into those areas.
The disproportionate representation, is it because these individuals don't feel comfortable about reporting? It's certainly that they're not seeing them, because everybody sees UFOs of all stripes.
Okay, all right. Then this is why I know I'm talking to my family and friends, because there's a segment in our history that we don't want to correlate with it, and which is not part of my message. What the heck is that? Okay.
I know, my phone's blown up too.
Oh, okay.
People don't know I'm on the air or something like that.
Yeah, but I'm on your show. That's out of respect. Don't call no more. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
That'll work.
So the part that I would like to convey, and I'll get into this in more detail tomorrow, is the timeline of our history. And I'll say it a little early on. If everybody look at this with open eyes, that's why my shirt says your eyes are useless when your mind is blind. And a lot of people don't open their minds. They can see things, but if their mind is not there, it's not going to matter. So, for example, if you think of MUFON, you think of Norfolk, they all was started in 1970, when I was born, by the way. And prior to that, you don't have, the only local place that you can report a UFO was the local sheriff departments.
And they're not going to take you seriously.
Well, no. What African American would have walked in there in the 30s and 40s and 50s when you had the KKK and all that and say, oh, by the way, I saw a UFO, and they was treating non-people of color bad about UFOs. So that was like double-edged. So you have a true legitimate, not on purpose, but a coincidence of our segment that those stories is not there, but they existed, but they're not there. And they're not in our record books. They're not in where we can pull from, especially when I was trying to do a book of history. I didn't have it.
But you're writing a book.
I'm writing a book.
What's it called?
The Unspeakable Truth. But it's a message out to my community that we have to begin to talk about it, because it does tie into religion.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll be back to continue our conversation with Roderick Martin here from McMenamins UFO Fest.
Into the paranormal.
All right, Roderick Martin with us here from McMenamins UFO Fest. Roderick, give the name of your podcast and the group that you're with.
It's Roderick Martin High Strangeness. That's going to be on YouTube and all of the other podcast platforms as well.
And your organization, do you have a group that you're
Yeah, my
representing?
organization is Project Black, which is the acronym for the Black League of Alien Contact Knowledge.
I love it.
Yes, and we're
Black League of Alien Contact Knowledge. I'm going to give that a
But that
wahoo.
includes everyone. It's just we're
Right.
just focusing on a specific area that's disproportionately reported.
All right, you were talking about your book before the break.
Were we?
We were.
I haven't printed it yet.
Tell us about it.
Well, it's basically a message to my community and all those who want to know more about why it's a taboo subject in my community, and just bringing a focus on a lot of areas, and also giving some indicators that there are signs in our history of major UFO things,
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't really know, and even maybe the audience, I can go into it, but yeah. Well,
Nation of Islam.
It is part of their religion. The mothership in Elijah Muhammad speaks that, but once again, I think it's not so much in an educational way, but more of, again, religion way, which I think is a barrier when it comes down to this subject matter.
This community not only has sightings, do they have contact stories?
Absolutely.
just like anybody else.
All humans does. You get what I'm saying? It's not segmented, and I say it in the community because that's where I reside. But contact and experience is happening all over the world. People getting abducted every day, you know?
Yeah.
Or having these experiences. It's just that the communication barrier stops or it doesn't cross over.
Do you think people are still actively getting abducted?
Yeah. I mean, they're just doing it better.
The aliens?
Yeah.
Able to
Yeah, their
cover
technology
their
is getting
tracks?
better. We had a 1957 Ford, now we got a 22 Escalade. They had flying saucers, now they got orbs and portals. I mean, they're just getting better at what they do.
I mean, maybe the way that they actually did the abduction years ago is different than the way they do it now.
Yeah, I mean, because it's technology. So
Right.
we have to assume if they're thousands and light years ahead of us, and we're now exposing them, and if they don't want to be found out, they're going to create better ways of doing what they do.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot because I understand you used to work for a military contractor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So did you see anything? Did you deal with anything?
I was at that time. I was very young, and I was working with a contract on a military missile at the time, and that was at the time that Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And when he did it unannounced, they had to find people to work on those projects. And at that time, I was at the University of Kansas on a football scholarship, and they had to go back to secret clearances till you was 18, and some of the older people at the time couldn't get cleared faster than that when he invaded. So they had a lot of younger ones who was doing the HARM missile project at that time, the high-speed anti-radar missile.
I was going to say, you look like a football player.
Yes, not because of my size. I've gained weight when I was married. Oh my God, that's
We all
another
do.
story. Oh yeah,
we all do.
Yeah, so that was a whole different story.
I don't know what we attribute to that. Maybe the cooking, maybe the love.
No, love.
We wear it.
But love comes in a lot of different forms.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. You just got to know what kind of love you want these days.
Exactly.
Yeah. You got to be careful with that.
All right, Roderick, again, where do folks follow you?
You can follow me on my YouTube channel as well. You will get some thought-provocative conversations that I do because I kind of focus on the ground. You know, Bob Salas once, echoed something.
Malmstrom incident.
Yes, and him and I talk, and he says, Roderick, everybody's focusing on what's going on in the sky. He says, who's going to focus on what's happening on the ground and trust the witnesses? And that's been the staple of my conversation, and that's where I go with that.
All right, Roderick Martin, let's hear it for him here at McMenamins UFO Fest. Lieutenant, I should say Ryan Graves. We know who Ryan Graves is. He's coming up next.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are concerned for flight safety. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue.
Into the Paranormal with Jeremy Scott. Somewhere between the paranormal and abnormal.
You know, it's always such a privilege, a pleasure. It's one of those bucket list items that I get to relive year after year after year, and that's coming to this great place, McMenamins Hotel, Oregon, for the UFO Fest. It's the 24th annual, and it's because of guys like this, former Lieutenant Ryan Graves, here in the flesh at McMenamins UFO Fest.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
In the U.S. Navy, I might say. Where did you serve?
The way it works in the Navy is that we're an expeditionary group. And so we're primarily stationed in Virginia Beach, at least my squadron was. And then we'll go aboard the aircraft carrier and we'll deploy to various places in the world to do our operations.
So you served multiple tours, multiple locations?
Yeah, aboard the USS Enterprise, my first deployment, and that was in support of Operation Enduring Freedom. And that was in Afghanistan, although I was operating above Afghanistan, not in it. And then aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, where we were supporting operations in Syria and Iraq.
And what was the time frame?
The first deployment was in 2015, and when we came, the first deployment was in 2012. Came home from that deployment. That's when we upgraded our radar systems And the second deployment was in 2015 aboard the TR.
All right. And so did you have, obviously you had sightings. How quickly did they begin into your deployment?
So when we first saw them, it was in about early 2014, and that was when we came back from the first deployment. So it was not actually on a deployment when we first saw it. We started to upgrade our radar systems from the APG-73 to the APG-79, a pretty significant upgrade. And when we flew with the new radar, we were seeing objects on our displays that were not there just the flight prior. And we didn't know what to make of it. We assumed at that time it was likely some type of radar error that would get resolved. The radar contacts themselves appeared different than what we would normally see. It would have some what I would just call jitter to it, so you could identify them from normal radar contacts outside of just the kinematics.
Right. So these things were spotted visually and sometimes picked up on radar?
We started on radar, and we would see them on there as far as we knew 100% of the time, because our radar looks over hundreds of cubic miles of airspace, and that's what is 99% of what we're using to interact with the world, launch our weapons and things of that nature. As we got close to these objects that we were essentially ignoring, expecting them to not even be physical objects, we would occasionally be flying with the AT FLIR in our cheek station. And again, we're home from deployment, so most of our better sensors are sent to aircrafts that are actually deployed. So we weren't flying with these AT FLIR on a daily basis. So it just happened that while we were ignoring these objects, an aircraft flew close enough to one of these objects where our radar essentially automatically locked it, which slews our AT FLIR, which they happen to be carrying, to that piece of the sky. And as they approached the object, they eventually were able to break out IR signature, infrared energy, that was coming from that part of the sky. So for us, that's what we consider correlation across multiple sensors and different energy bands, which is, for us, extremely high confidence that it represents now a physical object. And that's when the game kind of changed for us, because we now had to start respecting these from a aviation safety perspective to avoid hitting them.
Right, which is one of the reasons you founded your organization.
It is. You know, if we fast forward and I got out of the Navy, well, actually, not even when I got out of the Navy. In 2017, there's a somewhat famous New York Times article that came out, and it had a image and a video associated with it that's now known as the gimbal video. And that was a video I was present for when it was taken. Those are my buddies that took it. Some of them were in my wedding party, very good friends. And then I saw a video, and I realized that the expectation I had that this would get resolved, I had left the squadron at this time. I was now an instructor pilot. My expectation that this would be resolved through normal channels was incorrect. It was proven to be incorrect. And that's when I chose to speak out about this more broadly. I was not expecting to take it to the point that you suggested, starting a nonprofit, but the reality was that we kept encountering problems with the way that pilots, with the tools that pilots had to mitigate these risks while they were flying, and not just in the military, with commercial aviators as well. You played some of my testimony at the hearing. I was stressed out, so I don't remember the music being part of the testimony, but that was very nice.
Yeah, and special spooky
sound
sound
effects.
effects.
Put that in.
Yeah,
okay. I kid. But what I said there was that I was representing over 30 commercial pilots that had come forward to share their similar experiences with me. That number is well over 120 now. We continue to receive reports nearly daily from commercial pilots and veterans that are dealing with this while they fly, from major airlines, and we've had to formalize that process since we were receiving so much information into a formal database. And so we've started to collect those reports, break them down by location, size, shape, color, velocity, acceleration, all the things that you would like to know. And we're taking those reports and those witnesses, that again are mostly commercial pilots, and we have a couple of programs in place, one with law enforcement to recommend cases that might represent national security concerns, another with scientists and engineers that are associated with aviation safety that are interviewing these witnesses so that they can make recommendations to future reporting mechanisms for UAP.
Because as I've talked about earlier, not all of these are extraterrestrial. Some of them could be our own. Some of them could be a private organization. Some could be Russia or China or other countries. We want to get to the bottom of this and try to figure out what these are, and if they are a national security threat, then deal with that.
Yeah, we're very, very objective and pragmatic in the way that we approach this topic. We don't make assumptions about what these objects are. their intent, anything like that. But we do focus on cases that are unidentified and that do exhibit capabilities, what we consider beyond state of the art. And those cases are plentiful, and they represent potentially technological surprise from an adversary, and we should all be concerned about that from a national security perspective. And if not, we have to be concerned that our adversaries may take advantage of this opportunity to potentially fly balloons over our country with spying equipment in order to observe our bases that represent an aviation safety hazard.
Right. Would you say that what you experienced had some capabilities that couldn't be explained?
Well, that was the most confusing part about what we were observing. We were observing characteristics where, we would see these objects completely stationary at 0.0 Mach over a piece of the ground, 30,000 feet and 120 knot winds. That's equivalent to a Cat 3 hurricane. As in an F-18, we call it fighting to stay in the area in those circumstances where the wind is pushing us out of the area. And in these cases, the pilots are somehow getting pushed out of the area while these objects are flawlessly staying in a perfectly stationary position. And then subsequently they'll accelerate to 250, 350 knots, and then further accelerate to 1.1 or 1.2 Mach. And my F-18 can do some of those things, but it can't do all of those things, and it can't do all of those things continuously at will.
Right. So were these objects flying about the same speed or faster?
Well, they would either be stationary, or we'd see them all the way up to 1.1 to 1.2 Mach, which is about 800 miles an hour or so. So, again, they would be all within that spectrum, exhibiting all those characteristics. And, again, my jet can do some of those things, but it can't do them instantaneously. It can't do them consistently over long periods of time. And we would see groups of 3, 4, 5, 6 of these objects that would be within our working space nearly daily. And at first, again, I said we ignored them, but once we realized it was a safety issue, we started respecting them more. And of course, we almost had a near midair with one of these objects. One of my air crew, and this was the first time we visually had seen the object, but was proceeding out to the area. We enter at a certain GPS location and altitude, and we depart about 1,000 feet below that. And 2 F-18s from my squadron were entering the area. We tighten up as we enter that point so that we're not spread out into the adjacent areas, just like being on a road. And one of these objects went right down the right wing of the lead aircraft within 50 feet of his aircraft. And that was the first time that we've been able to describe it as a dark gray or black cube inside of a clear sphere. And that's when we actually had to actually do something. We had to file a safety report. We were legally obligated at that point. So we didn't just file one safety report. After conversation, we ended up filing about 5 safety reports that were backdated, but they're all submitted on the same day. And all this has been FOIA'd, so you can go confirm this. But that was when we kind of had our moment where we started sharing more of the incidents that we've been having and started to not ignore it, at least as a squadron. And from there, that's when we started communicating out. And again, I had hoped we went on deployment, and I had hoped that this would continue to escalate to a point where it get resolved. But unfortunately, in 2017, I discovered that was not the case.
Yeah. So what happened in 2017?
I saw the New York Times article come out, and I knew if they were essentially releasing that cry for help about this, then it was certainly not escalating through the normal channels. And now one of my good friends and advisor, Admiral Tim Gallaudet, former deputy director of NOAA, he was one of the recipients of some communication that occurred right near that incident off of Florida. After that video was captured by the aircrew, I observed it be debriefed in the security room, security space. I slunked back to the corner to try to observe the admiral that I had heard was being called down to review the tapes. I was curious for his reaction. So he walked in, observed it for about 5 to 6 seconds, went, and turned around and walked out, didn't even watch the full thing. For me, I made the assumption that he had seen these or had been dealing with them before. That was later confirmed to me by Lou Elizondo, who told me that he had contacted ATIP shortly after that event. And it was further validated, again, through Tim Gallaudet, who was the recipient of an email moments after the event calling for a cease of operation on any classified projects that were occurring because they were a clear and present danger to our flight operations. And that was essentially the only cry for help that they could muster. No one responded in the affirmative, and as Tim will attest, that email disappeared from his inbox the next morning, and that was the end of the conversation.
Yeah. Tim's actually come out with a report, I think, in the last couple of weeks as it relates to unidentified submersible or submerged objects. So in your tour, did you ever see any of these objects go in or out of water as they say, navigate these different mediums, transmedium craft?
That's not my personal experience. Our systems are not well designed to detect objects that are in that area. It's a generally well-known problem with radar clutter getting down low. But even so, it would simply look like an object that was near the surface, and then it wouldn't be there, is what we would see, unless we had essentially did what Dave Fravor did, where he was vectored directly to the object and intercepted it physically.
Yes. Yeah, very familiar with the Commander Fravor's story. So how were these safety reports handled? Obviously, they had to get passed up the chain.
Well, so that's the thing. This aviation safety reporting system with the Navy, and this is not a fault to it necessarily, but it's just what it is. It's more of a data collection mechanism. It's for statistical analysis to see what the trends are, and so long-term corrective actions can be applied. And in certain cases, we call them hazard reports or HAZREPs. We can submit a incident that represents a future threat, such as a near midair, which is what we submitted, and say, hey, this is a potential threat, and it should be communicated out to the fleet. And so that's what we filed when we submitted those first safety reports. They were technically called HAZREPs. And so that was then communicated to the Eastern Seaboard, and that was that. But that's where the conversation essentially ended. Just continuous flux of reports going in, but nothing happening on the other side.
As the first active duty military pilot to come forward on the subject of USOs, what did that take? Why did you decide to come forward? And then what was it like to get called to testify before Congress?
Yeah, my main motivation was when I saw the New York Times article in 2017, and I saw the article. I realized that this was not getting resolved, but I also then said, okay, I'm going to call my friends and colleagues that are still flying on the Eastern Seaboard and hear what they have to say, see if they were still having issues, and of course they were. There was a NOTAM, a Notice to Airmen, that was published to warn aviators of these objects in the area, and that was essentially the only mitigation that we had. We can stop for a second and recognize the fact that we've already talked about how this could be a national security threat, how these could be adversary spying on us, and that this is a state that we're currently in. And in my assessment, that we were being blinded by the stigma associated with whatever conversation our experiencers were getting associated with. You talk to one person, they're interested in this from a drone perspective. You talk to this from someone else, they go straight to the alien conclusion on what these objects are. So to get back to your original question on, what I think these objects are, is I think there's likely going to be a lot of different answers to that question. We're not very used to, in this country, being exposed to something that would be considered technological surprise. Mm-hmm. Maybe that is what we're seeing, and I think that's all the more reason for concern. But in either case, we need to actually pay attention to the problem and devote the resources to better understanding it. And I think that starts with collecting data from our first-hand witnesses and pilots that are experiencing this regularly.
And Sean Kirkpatrick has talked about exactly that, the technical surprise, actually referring to that as keeping him up at night. So I'm interested, as we wrap up our conversation in the next segment with former Lieutenant in the Navy Ryan Graves, whether or not the military actually possesses this technology. So we'll continue that thought after this.
Into the paranormal.
Where's the time gone? It's like we got abducted into a spaceship and deposited. We have all this missing time because it has been absolutely a blur the last hour and a half. My mind has been blown with all of the speakers up here. Welcome back to McMenamins UFO Fest in McMinnville. We have former Navy Lieutenant Ryan Graves up here. He's also the founder and executive director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. Talking about the technological surprise. Sean Kirkpatrick mentioned that in an interview. I'm wondering if we possess this technology such as that would make what you saw possible.
I don't know. I guess
Fair
that's
enough.
the short answer, right? So
Fair enough.
I can imagine some scenarios and some very exotic technologies that likely won't work out in reality over the next X number of years as we try to flesh it out. That could maybe perform some of these characteristics, but when you zoom out and you just look more pragmatically about what we're seeing and ask yourself questions about why are we seeing what we're seeing in certain areas for such a long period of time, and if you make the assumption, I think, that this is something we've paid a lot of attention to for a long period of time, then I think it would be safe to assume that we would probably be looking to take advantage of the same capabilities that we're witnessing, because they clearly outmaneuver the aircrafts that we're flying.
Right.
But I don't know if that's happening. And I don't think what we were seeing on the Eastern Seaboard, at least in that case, represents any type of activity like that. We have places where we test classified equipment, and even if we didn't want to test it there, Virginia Beach is probably one of the worst places to test something like that, because it's in international waters. Anyone can park a boat with whatever sensor systems they want to observe what we're doing over there. So we don't test our most secret technologies there, and we certainly didn't do it for over a decade.
Yeah. Were any of these craft exhibiting visible means of propulsion?
No, there was no exhaust plumes, any IR exhaust plumes. There was no lifting surfaces that we would observe. There was no, unexplainable kind of heat fuzzying around the object, right? Nothing that would indicate either directly or indirectly that it was doing something that was propelling itself or allowing it to maneuver in the way it was. It was simply not part of what we were witnessing.
Yeah. As far as the process to appear before Congress, we owe this man a lot because he has helped continue this conversation and do it on such a grand scale. You can go ahead and applaud.
Thank you.
So what was that like? Were you told there was certain things you couldn't address? Were you able to say what you wanted to say?
Yeah, there were very few guidelines, I'll say. I was invited by what we consider scheduling staff support for the committee, where they reached out to me and expressed what the hearing's intent was to cover, and why they reached out to me. It wasn't necessarily because of my particular experience per se, but because of the other experiences that I could represent through the witnesses that we've been receiving. And so that was that. There was no direct, instruction or anything like that. So I just spoke what I thought was most important.
Right. And you were up there with obviously David Grush and also Commander Fravor. What was that process like?
Well, I mean, specifically in regards to those two folks, there was no real interaction. Someone passed Dave's number to me, I think, the day before the hearing to say hello. Had a quick conversation, but there was no real interaction with either of the Daves, I guess. I spoke to Dave. I mean, we've been in contact for a number of years now, and of course, I would consider us friends. So we did have a small conversation, but more just making sure he was actually going to show up, I think.
Do you think Mr. Grush has helped continue this conversation along?
That's a good question. When you say this conversation, I think it's important to break that down a little bit. So I have a very specific way of engaging this conversation because of my direct experiences and my life experiences that led me to understanding this and engaging with it in a way that is through aviation safety and national security, because that's what I know. David's experiences are different than my experiences. His conversations are related to a historical context that I don't necessarily have the education on, and they involve very classified and what would likely be very legal programs within the government, which was not any part of my experience as an aviator. So having those two conversations in one hearing, I think, can be a bit confusing in general, because it immediately ties them together in a way that sets the bar very high. If someone says that there's alien bodies down the street, you would probably want to go knock on that door first, put a lot of resources into giving pilots a tool that they need to be able to report and be safe. So in some ways, it's moved the bar in the conversation that I'm having in a way that isn't overly positive, but he's having a conversation that is what is his to have based off of what he was tasked to do. And so I think that's a separate conversation, and he did that conversation justice from the testimony they gave, in my opinion. And so two different conversations, two different, I think, directions the way it can go, and that's my thoughts.
Any idea what needs to happen next at the government level as far as disclosure and pushing along further?
Yeah, gosh, there's so much to talk about in that. So, I think there's really two ways to proceed in that general direction. You can disclose information, and we can knock on the door of the government, and we can either trust or distrust what they give us. But I think the right way to do that is to continue to apply that pressure, but also proceed in a parallel direction, which would be through a process of discovery, a process of using the tools and open source to be able to gather data that can be communicated by scientific methods and standard procedures in a way that hasn't been done quite yet. And so I think that's really how we're going to move the conversation forward. And I think by expanding access to reporting through legislation such as the Safe Airspace for Americans Act and others that require the FAA to accept these reports, we're going to communicate about more. We're going to get more information on the public side, and that's going to motivate the government, I think.
Let's hear it for former Navy Lieutenant Ryan Graves from McMenamins UFO Fest. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much. Hope to see you next time, friends. Good night. God bless. Take care.